Well, welcome everybody. I'm assuming that you've made the transition, as it were, to this workshop. It took us a little bit of a while, so sorry for the delay, but welcome. First of all, to say, as I've already been introduced by Carrie, I'm Joy. I'm part of the Oasis team, and I'm really pleased to be here today. I'm very happy and very delighted to welcome you all, and thank you for choosing this workshop. I hope it will be a great experience for you. But I'm particularly delighted to welcome Vicki and introduce you to Vicki Curl today. She's here to tell her story about her experience of working through her transition with Marks and Spencer. And Vicki has had a very interesting life up to now. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about that, and then we're going to move on. But it's really important for you to know that Vicki trained initially as an engineer. She then went out to Africa to work as a mining engineer. After that, she completed an MBA in banking at the Manchester Business School. Then she entered banking in treasury and capital markets. That was 15 years ago. And after that, she worked in a whole variety of different businesses. So incredible background and experience. Only then to join Marks and Spencer 4 years ago. So lots for us to get to know about Vicki. But throughout all of this time, Vicki would say that she lived another life. She lived a life as a man, and she lived a life as another life as a woman. And what we're going to really hear more about today is how she came to realize that she didn't need to live her real life, if you like, in secret or in sort of duality. And how the opportunity arose for her to transition in the workplace. So we're really thrilled that you've been prepared to do this, Vicki, and we know that we're going to learn a lot from you. So I've got this pleasure of interviewing you this morning, and through that process, helping us all to learn a bit more about the really important responsibility for us as employers to get this right. There's no reason why we should get it wrong, but we need to learn how to get it right. And I just thought, as we were listening, we're going to listen now to Vicki, or in a moment, I thought it might be helpful just initially to run through what I've kind of identified as 10 top tips for us as employers in terms of our awareness, and also, as I was just saying, our responsibility. And I'm going to do that because I think it might help us to think about questions that we would have for Vicki at the end of the questions that I'm going to put to her, because I've got that privilege, which is a good moment for me to say that, and it's been said all along, that if you've got questions, please do put them in the chat. They'll go to our host, and she's, in this particular case, there's another host who's sitting with me, and she's going to give me the questions as they come along. So I'm very grateful to Danielle for that. So just very quickly, I don't want to take time away from the conversation with Vicki, but and many of these points have been made all along, but it's probably useful just for us to kind of get them in order, if you like. Some key points for us as employers. First of all, very importantly, take your lead from the staff member. Don't make assumptions about what they want. People are all different, and how they want to handle a situation, what changes they want to make at work, who they want to tell and when, and what support they'd find useful would not necessarily be the same in all cases, and it may not necessarily be what you'd automatically think as the employer. So take your lead from the person involved. Make sure you put the right planning in place. That's tip number 2. If an employee notifies you that they're beginning this process, sit down with them, spend time with them, and work out how they want to go through this. Really important, get that planning right. Top tip number 3, agree with the staff member what they want to do about their name change. A transitioning employee will probably wish to be addressed by a different name, and we'll hear a little bit about that from Vicki later on. But it's your job as an employer to ensure that their choice of name is respected and used, and that's something that we can go into a little bit later. Number 4, think about whether you need to adjust any of the duties, the role, if you like. That can be difficult, and it may not be necessary, or it might be appropriate to do that on a temporary basis. Particularly, and again, Vicki may say something about this in a public-facing role, but again, don't make any assumptions. Number 5, the all-important communications process, and I'm not going to go through the detail of that because, again, that's going to come out as we talk to Vicki. But as well as the communications plan, and this has been said, hasn't it, through the time we've had together today, people may have questions. So if you can work with the person and their team, perhaps to create team meetings with or without them, to allow people to ask questions so that they can be equipped and ready and prepared. The important thing about time off work for appointments, your employee may well need some time off work for those, for gender assignment related treatment. Employees should not be penalised for taking time off for medical treatment in respect of this. So if you operate any kind of trigger system where a certain amount of sickness absence results in disciplinary process, please make sure that you adjust that and that you record that separately. Dress codes, very important. Again, I know Vicki will talk about that, but have that conversation. Facilities at work, again, we're going to come on to this, but just to say, from the point of view, from the point the employee declares that they're living in their preferred gender, they should be able to access the appropriate toilet and changing facilities accordingly. You should consider, or you could consider providing some sort of gender neutral facilities, but you shouldn't force a transitioning employee to use those. And again, I know Vicki will say something about that. We've had this point again, number 9, make sure your policies are inclusive. You should have procedures for trans equality in the same way as you would do for any of the other protected characteristics, but make sure your policies are up to date and are inclusive. And very finally, training. You know, we've said it again this morning, other employees may not have come across this situation before and may genuinely not know how they're supposed to handle it, or what the vocabulary they should use and what is and isn't acceptable. So, and therefore engaging in training, and we've talked about resources here this morning, is really important. So those were 10 top tips. Enough from me. This is about Vicki, and back to you therefore, and thank you again. And I just wanted to start by asking you how you came to the point of transition. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Joy. I mean, when I was young, the first memory I have of feeling different was at age 5. I had no real language for it, but had a sense that I shouldn't really talk about it, and there was no sort of resource that I could approach. And in fact, it wasn't until I went to Manchester Business School, which was my second university, that I even sort of realised that there were other people in the world like myself. And that was quite a revelation, as you can imagine. I then sort of carried on in my sort of male role after business school, went into banking in the city, but at that stage did find some sort of groups where I could actually be my true self on a Friday night, shall we say. But I was predominantly in the male role throughout that. When I left the city and started having various businesses, when I was working from home, I could be who I wanted to be. So I spent sort of quite a lot of my time as Vicki, but any customer-facing situation, I would tend to be male. Well, would always be male. And it wasn't until I, for a variety of reasons, ended up working for Marks and Spencer after my mother passed. And I was only going there temporarily, but during the summer of that first year, I went to an event that I was going to anyway called Sparkle, a wonderful event up in Manchester, and discovered that Marks and Spencer's had a presence. And I met their diversity manager, and we started talking. And I realised that if I was going to transition within employment, that M&S would be a great place to do it, and that's where I sort of started my transition journey.
So a long time then, Vicki. It was, and you worked through all of that on your own in many situations, and I know a little bit more about that because we've talked. But coming to the point of transition during employment, and you've just explained how it came about. How did you went from there? You made the decision. You talked to management, and then you will have talked to other staff. How did management react? How did the other staff react? And how were you feeling at that time?
Okay. I think it was in that at that time when I met Leanne that I realised that I was going to go forward with this. And I did start talking to HR, but at this stage I didn't talk to direct line management. I had a little sense that I wanted to make sure I had some security, and I've been there for at least a year. That was just my personal choice. In hindsight, it probably wasn't necessary, but it was what I did. When I was ready to go forward, I sort of did two things in tandem. I started by telling the store manager, who was very, very supportive, and said he would cascade down the management line. But that coincided with, as it happened, one of the few colleagues who knew about my situation was hosting a party for our department. And so on that Saturday night, I went to the party as my old self, chatted one-on-one with a lot of people about the new suit advisor that was going to be joining Marks and Spencer's, and showing them pictures of myself in feminine mode. But then halfway through the party, once I'd talked to most people, I went upstairs, changed, and everybody got to meet Vicki for the first time. Within that group, going on from there, at work, I chose to tell all of my, all the people I knew, although very quickly they already knew, because what the rumor mill is like. I had a policy of saying to people, look, if you've got any questions, I'm an open book, just ask me. I would rather you get the information from me. There's no question I will shy away from, but don't talk about me behind my back type thing. And that worked very well. On my days off, as I've been doing for some time anyway, I would shop at M&S anyway. And so lots of people had already met me without knowing it, but I formally introduced myself as Vicki to them. So up until the point where I actually formally made the change, most of my colleagues had been sort of acclimatized to what was going on. With regard to work, there was total support from management, and things like uniform. Well, as it happens, I didn't tend to wear a uniform because I was a suit advisor. I used to wear a male suit. As I was transitioning, I spent time with one of our style and fit people who helped me select some outfits that would be suitable for the workplace. And that was all supported by M&S. And it came to the day where I went home on Sunday as my old self, and had Monday off as it happened anyway, and came into work on Tuesday as Vicki. And it's been fantastic ever since.
It's a brilliant story, isn't it? It's fantastic. I mean, I think M&S deserve probably a medal. From what I can gather, they've done it really well. But just kind of going back through what you said and picking out for us as employers, the kind of what was important or what was helpful perhaps at that time. I think the first thing you said was you went and talked to HR. So that having access to someone in HR, it was really important to you, because that was the very first conversation, wasn't it, as far as I can gather?
The official one, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, but before that, I know you talked to others, but having access to someone, so it's really important that people in HR are equipped and able to respond, and that's something for us as employers to take on board. Sometimes in HR, it can be very sort of admin based, can't it? But actually having somebody who people can go and talk to confidentially and who are equipped is really another one of those top tips, I would say. I think, I mean, you had great friends around you, but coming back to the workplace, another couple of things that you pointed out, having security in your role was important to you, wasn't it? You weren't going to do this while you were a temporary member of staff, I think you said.
I did say that, and I think in the case of M&S, it probably wouldn't have been an issue, but it was just my slight paranoia, shall I say, when I was considering my options. I'll also express the sort of difference. So back in when I was still in banking, I had gone through the whole process of going through the medical route to sort of, if you like, be diagnosed and get the option of going forward and transitioning at that stage. And although I really wanted to, I couldn't see how it would work in the workplace. Now, ironically, the banking industry is now very much at the forefront of all of this. But so this opportunity, or this timing at M&S was sort of like my second go at it, where I felt much more comfortable, whereas I couldn't see it working when I was in banking at that time.
Interesting how things change, eh? And then just moving on from the HR point, I think the next thing you did is you talked to a line manager, didn't you? So having the importance for all of us, regardless of whatever situation we're dealing with in our organizations, our projects, having good line management, it is such a backbone of a really good, strong organization. You just cannot underestimate it. And in these situations, how important it is that you were able to go and you were able to talk, I think you used the word openly, with your line manager, and that line manager being able to respond capably, confidently, confidentially, sensitively with you was crucial. And it just underlines just the importance of our job as employers to ensure that our line managers are up to it in every respect, and particularly in these cases as well. So that was, yes, go on. Yeah,
say that I think it all stemmed though from M&S as a company having very clear guidelines of how to operate in the situation. When I first spoke to HR, they sent me copies of all of that. And it's probably fair to say that when I actually did speak to line managers, I was probably more knowledgeable about the company's policies than them, because any one manager is probably unlikely to have been exposed to the situation. So while totally supportive, they knew they were going to help me and what have you, but they didn't know what the rules were. But they very quickly got themselves up to speed. But the foundation of this was that there was actually a policy in place that everybody could refer to, and everybody was on the same page. And it was very much about the individual, myself, guiding the pace, and it went at my pace. Obviously, not doing anything that the employer didn't want me to do, but going at my pace. And so I took the initiative to drive the process the way I wanted to drive it.
Brilliant. And just say, perhaps before we leave this question, just come back to that point around the management responding with good planning and good communications, because I know that was key. I know you said, well, one day it was this and then one day it was that bad. It wouldn't have been as easy as that. And a lot of preparation would have gone in behind the scenes to make sure that people were ready for this. So just a few words on that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole process was probably about a month from where I had the first conversation with the store manager to when we chose an appropriate date to go forward. And so behind the scenes, it was agreeing what my name change would be, getting new badges, as I say, sorting out what I was going to be wearing, and all those bits and pieces. Making sure, and then going through all the process of which sort of ran in parallel with what was happening in my life outside, changing names on passports and driving licenses and bank details and all those types of things. So everything sort of dovetailed in together. But the inside M&S part was actually quite easy.
And there was a lot going on for you at the time, so it's very good that an employer can not add stress to what was a very busy time, if not a stressful time. So thank you for all of that. So so there you go. Marks and Spencer's were clearly sort of really good, brilliant, in fact, with you, and made you feel comfortable and de-stressed it, which is great. But it'd be good now to talk about what wasn't helpful. So, loads of tips and good advice. Now, that's perhaps not talking so much about Marks and Spencer as an employer, but I know you have had experience of what wasn't helpful at that particular time. So I've just put that question to you to tell us a little bit about those things, the obstacles that you came against.
Okay, so I obviously had to do everything in all areas of my life, and one of those, I play a fair bit of squash. So at the sports club, I had to sort of both talk to the individuals that I knew, my friends and what have you. That part was easy, but the sports club, which was part of a fairly big school, it became clear they didn't really have any what I would call proper policies about this, and particularly when it came down to what changing rooms I should use and so forth. And it was really quite unsatisfactory initially. It took some time to sort of get to the point where they were relaxed about me being a woman in the facilities. So that wasn't great. And although I've had no problems at M&S, I have a friend, for example, I've had a number of friends who've had issues, but one I think of in particular was working for a relatively big but owner-managed business, working for the military or doing contracts for the military. And their experience was nowhere near as supportive as I received, and to the extent that the business owner didn't want them to be meeting any customers anymore, and was almost hiding the fact that what was happening. It took quite some time, in excess of a year, for that sort of to find its place. And what was interesting was it was more what the employer was sort of projecting on their potential customers of how the customers would react. But in fact, the customers were all fine. It was all in that employer's mind, the challenges that they perceived.
Yes, that's interesting, isn't it? So just going back then to the experience with the squash club, and what happened was, I suppose, I mean, again, it wasn't an employment situation, but they were in an employment situation, because I'm sure they would have had staff, that you discovered really that probably there was no policy in place and there hadn't been any staff training, and that the people were really paying lip service to transition requirements and hadn't really engaged in the reality of it. So you found your own way around that, didn't you? In terms of sorting things out. What advice would you give us as employers because this issue of washrooms, toilet facilities is the one that has come up, is apparently contentious. It shouldn't be. What would you advise?
I mean, I think the first thing is to have policies in place. I mean, sensible, inclusive policies that work for everybody, rather than sort of floundering around, reacting to the fact that suddenly I was on their doorstep, wanting something to happen, and they weren't really ready for it. So is really the answer.
Yes, exactly. And there are different ways in which you can use those washroom facilities. You can either have that use, obviously there's many of them that are cubicled anyway, but it needs thinking about, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So that was what wasn't helpful for you, and then you went on to talk about what employers you think struggle with, and there's this business of I don't know whether or not it's fair to say that some employers can overthink it, and they think they do the thinking for their clients, if you see what I mean, trying to anticipate what the clients might think, or double thinking, maybe that's what it's called, rather than allowing people to make their own minds up and to behave in the way that they choose to behave. Do you think that's something that, I mean, is that something, and you talked about that being an experience that your friends have experienced. Have you ever had anybody double thinking on your behalf?
No, but in hindsight, they've recognized that I've probably been, when I'm being myself, I'm much more effective. I've been in sales for most of my life once I've left the mining industry, and I've always been very good at it. But it was even perceived that I was even better at it when I was actually my natural self. That my ability to build rapport, win customer confidence, and get good outcomes in the sales context was enhanced by me being me. And so my message to employers would be, if you let your staff be themselves, you're going to get the best out of them. Well,
that's a brilliant way to bring these questions to a certain point. We've got more questions for you, Vicki, but that's such an important point, isn't it? Work with your employees in terms of who they are. Don't try and force them to do a role or a job that they are not perhaps cut out for. And in this particular case, to understand who you are, what your real identity is, and not to be frightened of that. Again, that word fear and frightened has come up a lot during this morning. So it's a brilliant way to bring that to this bit to a little bit of a close. And now we were a little bit prepared, because Vicki and I did rehearse this a bit, although I've used a bit of license as we went through this. But now time for some questions. So I'm going to look to my host now, and I've got some questions here for you, Vicki. So I'm going to so really what we really would love people to do is to start sending in questions in the chat, and if they could put work or employment at the start of the question, that would be helpful, because then it helps us to sort through, as there are questions coming in for all of the workshops. But as a first question, just to get again back to this business of name change, just from a personal point of view, Vicki, what was it like for you and for others on that day when you did the name change? Because on the day before you had one name, and on the day after you had another name. How was it for you and for them, and how long did it take for everyone to get used to it? Because it's quite a step, isn't it?
Yeah.
That and the uniform, I would think. Yeah.
I actually probably found it easier in the context of work. I mean, apart from anything else, we all have name badges on, so people get a nice little reminder of your name every time they see you. So, and for me, it was nothing new, because I have actually spent so much of my time socializing and being Vicki anyway. So that wasn't a problem in itself. Probably found more issues with people that I've known a long time, and some of them, although they weren't in any way antagonistic, some of them, it took them a little longer to get into the proper habit of calling me Vicki, rather than my old name. So I have to say, not too much of a problem for me personally.
Not a problem. That's good. So I mean, I know you have actually told me of one or two situations, but where customers have been a bit tricky. Could you just tell us how you handled that? And again, thinking about what you would do in terms of, advice for employers in that case. I
mean, well, first of all, the managers at M&S had always said, if you have any issues with customers, we will be totally supportive, and you can always call upon their support. I've actually found that it's never really been an issue. I take a view, if someone accidentally misgenders me and there was no malice, I tend to often let it ride over me. But if someone's doing it consistently, and for example, let's say I'm trying to help them find the best suit they need or whatever, and yet that being disrespectful in that way, I just put them in the place and say, look, if you want me to help you, please start using my proper name or gender or whatever it happens to be. And I found them in that situation in some ways quite apologetic, and when I started putting them in place, and then we've got on with it, and it's been absolutely fine. But it's been very rare. I mean, generally, not a problem, I have to say.
Thank you. So just trying to make sure that we get, I know there's a couple of questions come in, and could you just pop maybe to Jim and see whether or not we've got them in a different rooms? We're not getting them as we thought. I've definitely seen 2 or 3 come in, and we just need to make sure we get a hold of them. So that's about how handling people who don't agree with you. You've got a very straightforward way of doing it, Vicki, so well done to you. But where do you get your support from, and what should employers, it's all very well you went through that process right at the very beginning, with Marks and Spencer, and they were great. But in terms of ongoing support, either from your employer and or from other people, what kind of support do you feel you need, and where do you go for it?
I mean, I don't think my situation is necessarily typical, because I haven't, once I made the decision and I've been living it, I haven't felt that great need for support. I've got great friends around me, and in all the various aspects of my life, I haven't had any real challenges, and so therefore, it hasn't really been a problem. I could imagine someone that hasn't lived with the concept of wanting to do this for such a long time may have more challenges, and there probably ought to be more sort of help in terms of help within either one business or a whole string of businesses where there's a network where people can go for help and support and ideas. But I'm not aware if that exists, but again, I haven't needed it, so I haven't been looking for it.
So you feel that in your role in Marks and Spencer, you've been quite established almost from the very beginning, and you've not needed ongoing support or people. I mean, presumably Marks and Spencer's must have learned from you, I should think.
I would like to think so, and indeed I was involved in doing a diversity training video where I was interviewed for some internal training. So I'd like to think I have contributed to how M&S have developed their ways of doing things and moving forward.
And what kind of things have you said back to them?
I mean, to be honest, I think, whereas before COVID, there was a lot of communication going on, it's been a very different world since COVID. So not much has been happening, but I would expect things to sort of, because not just for gender, but all aspects of diversity, there is quite a strong presence or culture within M&S. So I would expect to get involved in some of those things going forward, but it's been quiet lately because of COVID. Okay,
thank you. So we've got a question here now from can't exactly see who it's from, but anyway, let me tell you what the question is how can an employer support a trans or non-binary person if there is, I can't see if there is a, let me see if I can, if there is, sorry, if there is a uniform policy. So let me just read that again, because I didn't do a very good job of that. How can an employer support a trans or non-binary person if there is a uniform policy? You have a uniform policy, but in actual fact it was slightly different from you, but it'd be interesting to see what you think about that.
I mean, I think they should be driven by the wishes of the individual. I mean, if somebody is, changing gender like I did, then it's a very black and white issue. If you're changing gender, you tend to change the uniform or the dress code. But if somebody is non-binary, I think they should be allowed to where from what is available within the uniform portfolio, what best suits them and expresses their personality.
Have you had experience of that in Marks and Spencer, as far as you know?
I'm sure within Marks and Spencer as a whole there have been, but I'm not aware of it. And in our store, I'm not aware of any situations like that. But I'm aware in other businesses, and I know someone who's fairly senior in an American bank who is not non-binary, gender fluid, and will either work as his male self or female self on any given day, depending on how they feel at that time, and that's totally accepted within that organisation. And it's obviously very refreshing that can happen.
And how do I mean, just in terms of it, were you aware of, and have you been part of staff training around transition? Have you, does Marks and Spencer actually do training sessions? I don't even know how they would do it. Do they do it on video? How do you get to be part of training? And have you been part of this kind of, and what is it like? What's the training like?
Okay, I mean, the training for staff is really part of an overall diversity training to make sure that we're totally inclusive, and that is generally done as online tutorials. And as I said, I was interviewed at some length, give my input to that process for the gender side and the transitioning. I am not aware, but I would imagine there is additional training for managers at all levels for their ability to implement it. But it's all driven essentially from having those strong policies to deal with the matter in the first place.
Okay, thank you for that. And I've got some more questions here now. So we've got about 10 minutes left. So another one is, I'm supporting a trans individual who tells me about microaggressions and possibly bullying in their workplace. As I'm in a different organisation from my client, so can't talk to those involved, as well as listening, which I know is really important. Do you have any ideas of what I can say to my client to help support them? So this is about support around microaggressions and bullying, although it says possible bullying here.
I mean, I think they've just got to seek the support of their line manager and further up the line on this, because any employer worth their salt is not going to tolerate that if they know it's happening, but they can't do anything about it if they're not aware. So I think there just has to be some communication, and some of it may not be intention, but some of it in those situations is intended, and those people need to be put in their place and reprimanded or re-educated.
So it comes back to that person, that HR person, and it comes back to good land management. It comes back to the backbone of a good organisation. So I hope you feel, the person who asked that question, is to go back to your client and help them to encourage them to go back to their management. I would say in particular that person in HR, let's hope, but if there isn't, then hopefully a line manager. Another question here, Vicki, is transition continual, or do medical appointments continue years after? And did M&S offer counselling, or was that through your clinic transition programme? Great question. They're all great questions. Thank you. I
mean, M&S haven't offered any counselling in that sense, but what's happening in the medical side is sort of running alongside everything else, and is still in some ways ongoing. but M&S have been very supportive with regard to any time off I need, through that process. So again, I think it was mentioned earlier, I would expect a good organisation to be flexible, and if they've got, you say, triggers for disciplinary action, that they should be turned off if it's related to someone transitioning.
Yeah, so that's an important point for us all to learn, isn't it? That's not so much in a small organisation, because that can be managed one-on-one, but a large organisation where there are systems, and I'm thinking of Oasis myself, and just so easy to be system-led. Computer says no, and actually this is about engagement, it's about one-on-one, it's about getting to know people, and it's about ensuring that you bother with the small detail, which is not small for the individual. This is really important. Okay, I hope you're doing okay with these questions, Vicki. So far so good, it's brilliant. What can a business organisation do to ensure that a trans or non-binary person is safe at work in customer-facing roles? So this is really particular to you, or roles that work with external contractors. I know you've also got friends who are in some of these roles.
I mean, I think it all comes down to communication. It's first of all, I mean, a situation where you are customer facing, I think you just got to know that the business has got your back, and they won't tolerate any adverse behaviour, and that is something that I think businesses can control to some extent, because they can choose who their clients are in that regard, and they should be prepared to stand up for you and put those people that are behaving badly in their place. I guess in a situation with sort of contracts and stuff, I guess it comes down to the same thing. I mean, terms of business in contracts can include issues relating to policies on diversity and what they will and will not tolerate. And so I think it could be part of terms of business that will allow the employer to dictate what happens in outside situations, but when things go wrong, to be there for the employee.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important, isn't it, these days, that our boards of management are diverse, that there is that there's a good representation of people on those boards of management, and that our senior management teams are also, that people can see themselves, if you like, in the leadership of any of our work, our projects, or our organisations. So it's really important that this is understood and taken as a responsibility from, I hate this term I'm going to use now, but from the top, because if it's not, then it's almost impossible for the organisation to either become diverse or to ensure that those responsibilities are put in place. It's impossible. So it's got to be held, and those of us who are on this call are responsible for employment. It's got to be raised at our boards, it's got to be raised with our senior managers, and they need to understand their responsibilities. Because if they don't, they'll be left behind organisations.
Sorry, I was going to say, and I think basically down the management line, each level of management should be empowered to do what is right and to implement the policies and so forth. So it comes down to empowerment.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. But if it's not held where there is accountability, it's jolly hard. And so I think those of us who are responsible for employment and for HR have got that opportunity to make these points abundantly clear. Because as I was just saying, I think more and more, if we're not diverse as employers, as organisations, we will be left behind, because people are asking that question and have that right expectation today. Another question, Vicki. What can an employee do? So this is good, because it just follows on from where we've just been. If management or HR aren't supportive, understanding of your circumstances. Now, you had very supportive circumstances, but I do know, so we were talking a little bit about your family, that some of that, not them directly with you, but their experience of employment in their employments. There wasn't always support or understanding. So it'd be good just to hear what your response would be to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're possibly referring to the conversations I had with my two grown-up daughters, and it was quite interesting that one who at the time was an actress, had plenty of experience of people who were gay and so forth, but had not encountered anybody who was trans. And yet my daughter in the army was totally familiar with it, because in fact the army is very very progressive in terms of its policies to people who are trans and are looking to transition and so forth. And almost counterintuitive on those points. So that was, I think, what we picked up on before.
Yes, I mean, and if you are in, I mean, this is, if you're in an organisation where there isn't understanding, there isn't awareness, there isn't perhaps a willingness, by management or by HR to engage with people who are going through this process, or to make it easier for them, or just who are just perhaps just not on it. Yeah. What can someone do? And I was just thinking, I mean, especially if you're in a unionized organization, you can go to your union and raise it. And I think, I mean, alternatively, you could always write to the board, because if you do have a board in place, I suspect most people on this call will be, not all of them, but many of them will be in the voluntary sector, so they will have boards of management. So there is an opportunity perhaps to put in a request at that level, maybe even anonymized if that was necessary, although it shouldn't be. But it is hard. I mean, an employee would have to go outside, I suspect, for that support. And it no doubt would mean that person would probably feel that they didn't want to stay in the organisation if they weren't getting the support.
And maybe they want to actually talk to an employment lawyer of some sort to look at the actually happening, whether it's tantamount to some form of constructive dismissal, that they're just not being supported and feeling the need to leave. So they're and I don't know, but I would imagine even citizens' advice would have potentially some support for people to get ideas of how to proceed and where to go.
Yes, but awareness is it comes back to the awareness. I mean, obviously, an employer should know that they have this responsibility. But if they're turning a blind eye, then it is about raising awareness. But even if that doesn't work, then I think it's where difficult conversations have to happen, where an employer has to be brought to their responsibilities and to understand. And of course, this is where lawyers, like you say, can get involved, or unions, but it shouldn't have to get there. It should be a conversation. It should be in relationship, and it shouldn't be a problem. So I don't know whether anybody's got a final question. We've got a couple of minutes. I think we've just had a tiny bit of an extension. They did say 12:35, and we've managed that time beautifully, said she. You've managed that time beautifully, Vicki, to get us to this point. But this is a moment for anyone to put in the chat a final question that you want to have the opportunity to ask Vicki. While you're doing that, if one emerges, I just want to say how grateful I am to Vicki for doing this. It's not easy at all, and we have been very aware of the sensitivities and the making oneself open to all of you and to all of the whole of the conference. So we're incredibly grateful. I'm also very grateful to Marks and Spencer, because I know that they've given you particular time to do this, which is great, which actually is another point, isn't it? Another aspect of this process is to have the opportunity to do this kind of PR. So we are very grateful to Marks and Spencer, and I hope all of us can run off and go and get a sandwich from Marks and Spencer now, because they deserve it.
The other thing I would just say, I've just taken on a role where I will be involved in training new recruits. So it's another way in which new people joining M&S, and I'm sure this will be across the country. This, I think, will be happening. Although I'm not there specifically to talk about diverse issues, they will see that M&S has a very comprehensive diversity policy, because there I am in front of them and doing the training when they first come on board. So I think those sort of things help, rather than it always being a stereotypical person that is doing the training.
Thank you. That's a great thing. I didn't know you'd done that, so it's great to know about that. And I think we just perhaps have a final question here. What are trans and non-binary people, do you think, looking for in an employer? What can an employer do to show that they are safe to work for? It's a great question, because you asked that question of yourself, didn't you, right at the very beginning?
Yeah. I mean, I think they should just be treating everybody as people and as individuals, supporting them to give the best of themselves for the organisation. And we should be no safer than anybody else. Everybody should have the same right to feel totally safe at work, whatever our outward presentations are, or so forth. So it should be just creating that total level playing field, and looking to the individual.
Demonstrating, talking out inclusion, making that a key priority, a key principle for the success of any organisation, that everybody is included, nobody is excluded. It's a great point, and thank you for that question. Okay, so literally we've got 2 minutes. I'm going to ask you all. It's not for Vicki, because she's done enough. I think she's done absolutely brilliantly for us. You can take a breather, Vicki. But I'm going to ask you all to type in the chat one thing that you'll take away, quick fire, from this session, whilst we give Vicki a breather and before we say our final thank you to her. So don't think about it. Don't spend ages. Just put it into the chat and see what we learn from this. What's the one thing that you would take away, one learning from this session? We're all glued to the chat now. So when our phones all ping and make a noise. I don't know, this is when I'm not sure actually whether my chat's going to pick all of this up. Oh, here we go. Better able to support my non-binary sibling through employment challenges with the UK entertainment company. Great. Any others? Let's see them. Well, I'm sure there will be coming. But actually, it is 12:30. Here's another point. Let them be themselves, and staff will flourish. That's a great point.
I've seen a couple come up on my chat. One is communication is key. Another one, importance of training HR staff. Yeah, absolutely. Raise it to management if there's any issues. There's one here. And take the lead from the employee, which is a big point. Brilliant. Well, listen, we're at 12:39. Thank you to all of you who have listened and have been taking part in this workshop. I'm really grateful that you'll take your responsibilities as employers really seriously. And I can't thank Vicki enough for being prepared to do this and to come on screen and take questions that you didn't know were coming, and to help all of us so much with this really important issue of getting it right as the employer. So Vicki, thank you very much. I'm sure we can do a on screen. I don't think you can hear us, but I'm thumbs up and a big round of applause for you. And we'll talk later, I'm sure, but thank you again.